The Luftwaffe pilots who first encountered the Bristol Beaufighter in late 1940 reacted as any seasoned aviator would. They assessed their opponent. What they saw didn't worry them much. The aircraft looked huge by fighter standards, its fuselage bulky compared to the sleek Messerschmitt Bf-109, it was supposed to rival. Its twin engines gave it a serious look, sure, but the sheer size made it appear awkward, almost clumsy. Early German intelligence report described it as heavy and slow in turns, lacking the agility of single-engine fighters. Some Luftwaffe crews began mocking it, confident they could outmaneuver this British newcomer if it ever tried to fight. That confidence vanished the moment it fired. What those German pilots couldn't see from the outside was a deadly weapon setup packed into the Beaufighter's belly. 4 Hispano Mk2 cannons, each 20 mm in caliber, were tightly grouped under the forward fuselage. This wasn't the usual scattered layout across the wings that left gaps where bullets met. These 4 fired almost perfectly parallel, forming a cone of destruction about 1 meter wide at 250 meters. When a Beaufighter pilot pulled the trigger, he didn't spray bullets, he unleashed a wall of explosive shells. Each Hispano shell weighed around 130 grams and left the barrel at roughly 880 meters per second. Every round carried a high explosive incendiary charge that detonated on impact. Multiply that by 4 cannons, each firing about 600 rounds a minute. In a 2-second burst, the typical combat firing time, a Beaufighter launched around 80 shells. 80 explosive projectiles that could rip through aluminum skins, cut control cables, ignite fuel, or tear an aircraft apart. German bomber crews flying Heinkel's and Dorniers learned this the hard way. A Deuce-17 might survive dozens of rifle-caliber hits and limp home full of holes, but nothing could withstand 4 20mm cannons firing together. The first Beaufighter victories weren't really dogfights, they were executions. Bomber crews saw the twin-engine fighter closing from behind or below, assumed it was too slow to be a threat, and then their aircraft simply came apart. Wings folded upward. Fuselages snapped in half, engines exploded into flames that swallowed the plane within seconds. One Luftwaffe pilot who survived an encounter over the English Channel in March 1941 described the horror. He was flying as a wingman in a formation of Ju-88s returning from a raid when a Beaufighter climbed up beneath them. He thought they had time to dodge. The British fighter opened fire for more than 300 meters. Too far, he believed, and his commander's plane just exploded. Not caught fire, exploded, as if hit by flak. The entire fight lasted maybe 4 seconds, but that's what changed everything. The Beaufighter didn't need agility when its targets vanished after one burst. Bristol's reason for designing such a devastating aircraft came down to Britain's dire situation. In spring and summer 1940, the IAF faced several crises at once. Bomber Command needed long-range escorts for deep strikes into occupied Europe, something the short-range Spitfire and Hurricane couldn't do. Coastal Command needed planes that could hunt U-boats and protect ships far out in the Atlantic, beyond single-engine range. Fighter Command wanted night fighters big enough to carry the new airborne radar sets, which were too heavy for small planes normally. Solving all this meant building a new aircraft from scratch, a process taking 3 or 4 years. Britain didn't have that time. France had fallen, and the Luftwaffe was preparing for the Blitz. The Air Ministry needed a quick answer, immediately. Bristol's chief designer, Leslie Fries, made a bold, practical choice. He'd build a fighter using parts already in production. The wings would come straight from the Beaufort torpedo bomber, already flying and being built. The tail would come from the Blenheim light bomber. The engines would be Hercules radials, and even the landing gear would be reused. It was an elegant engineering. It was aircraft designed by Salvage, but it was fast up. Fry's team started in October 1939, and by July 17, 1940, just 9 months later, the prototype was flying. For comparison, Germany's Bf-110 heavy fighter had taken almost 3 years from drawing board to combat. The Beaufort wings brought one major bonus. They were built to carry a 900 kilograms torpedo under the fuselage, giving them far greater strength than any normal fighter wings. That solid construction easily supported the Beaufighter's heavy guns and extra equipment. And the recoil forces of 4 20mm cannons plus 6 machine guns in the wings. The roomy fuselage, made possible by simply stretching the Beaufort original design, offered enough space for radar equipment, a navigator station, and large fuel tanks that gave the aircraft a range of over 2,500 kilometers. Bristol had In effect, created a fighter almost by accident through reusing bomber parts. The Beaufighter was big because bombers are big. It was strong because torpedo bombers must be strong. It had long range because maritime patrol aircraft require it. None of this was ideal for traditional dogfighting, but the Beaufighter wasn't built for that. It wasn't meant to duel Messerschmitt Bf-109s over the Channel. The first operational unit, number 25 Squadron, received their Beaufighters in September 1940, just 14 months after design work began, and they were in combat by the end of that month. From drawing board to battle in just over a year was unheard of, and it was exactly what Britain needed while German bombers pounded cities nightly. Mounting 4 Hispano cannons under the fuselage instead of spreading them across the wings marked a major change in gunnery philosophy. Most fighters of the time spread their weapons to avoid overloading any single part of the A-frame. The Spitfire, for example, carried 8 machine guns divided between its wings. The Bf-109 had 2 cowl guns and 2 or 3 cannons in the wings. This layout made sense structurally. It balanced the plane and reduced stress, but it created a big problem called convergence. Wing-mounted guns had to be aimed slightly inward so their fire met at one point ahead of the aircraft, usually 200 to 300 meters away. Fire too close, and your bullets miss on either side. Fire too far, and they spread apart again. The result, a narrow distance band where all guns hit together. The Beaufighter solved this completely. Its 4 Hispano cannons sat tightly packed in a box-shaped compartment below the cockpit, all barrels parallel and separated by just centimeters. There was no convergence angle. Nothing needed to converge. The shells left the guns in an almost perfect cylinder of fire. A pilot shooting at 100 meters was hitting the same area as one firing at 400 meters. The cone widened slightly over distance due to small barrel vibrations or ammo variation, but the difference was minimal. This tight grouping multiplied its destructive effect dramatically. Imagine 4 explosive shells striking within a dinner plate-sized circle at the same time. The first would puncture a bomber skin. The second, arriving a split second later, would explode against already weakened metal. The third would punch deeper into the torn structure, and the fourth would blow inside a fuel tank or ammo bay. It was like a demolition sequence compressed into a blink, destruction that looked instantaneous. The Hispano Mk2 cannon itself was a highly advanced weapon. Designed originally in France by Hispano Suiza, it was built under license in Britain with modifications to improve reliability. Each cannon weighed about 42 kilograms and was roughly 2.5 meters long. The ammunition came in different types: high explosive incendiary, semi-armor piercing incendiary, and practice rounds. The high explosive incendiary shell, used most often against aircraft, contained about 11 grams of explosive, enough to rip apart aluminum A-frames with deadly fragmentation. With 4 cannons firing 600 rounds per minute, a 2-second burst sent 16 to 20 shells from each gun, totaling 64 to 80 projectiles. To put that in perspective, the combined explosive weight delivered in 2 seconds was greater than what many light bombers dropped in a single attack. The Beaufighter was, in essence, flying artillery. On top of that, 6 extra machine guns backed up the cannons, 4.303 Brownings in the wings and 2 more on some versions in the outer right wing. These weren't the main weapons. They were guides and distractions. Their tracers helped the pilot adjust aim and force enemy gunners to flinch and duck during those deadly seconds before cannon range. Luftwaffe crews soon learned to recognize a Beaufighter's attack pattern. First came the tracers, bright lines in the night sky. Then came the cannon fire, and by then it was far too late to react. German military intelligence, the Luftwaffe's Nachrichtenverbindung, took pride in analyzing captured aircraft. When a wrecked Beaufighter was recovered near Dover in November 1940, analysts went to work as usual, measuring, weighing, calculating. The wingspan was 17.63 meters, larger than the Bf-110 16.3. The fuselage stretched 12.7 meters, broad and cylindrical. Most revealing was a weight, about 6,800 kilograms empty and nearly 9,500 kilograms loaded for battle. The experts did their math and reached what seemed the obvious conclusion: an aircraft as heavy, with so much drag, couldn't possibly be maneuverable. The report that circulated among Luftwaffe units in early 1941 classified the Beaufighter as a heavy fighter, with emphasis on heavy. It noted that its twin Hercules engines produce about 1,400 horsepower each, but concluded that most of this power was lost to weight and drag. Maximum speed was estimated at roughly 515 kilometers per hour, slower than the Bf-110's reported 560. What the analysis completely overlooked was that maneuverability and combat effectiveness were not the same thing, especially at night. The German assessment focused on toning radius, roll rate, and acceleration, factors that mattered in daylight duels between single-engine fighters. No one in German intelligence seemed to realize that a night bomber hunter needed something entirely different that a Beaufighter didn't have to outturn a Heinkel. It just had to sneak within 300 meters unseen, hold a steady aim for 2 seconds, and survive long enough to break away. Yet this flawed assessment spread through bomber units in tactical briefings. Crews were told that if attacked by a Beaufighter, they should perform tight turns because a heavy British fighter supposedly couldn't follow. Several Ju-88 crews tried that in early 1941 and paid the price. The Beaufighter didn't need to follow the tone. The pilot simply waited for the bomber to finish its maneuver, line up again, and then fired into the predictable flight path. Those extra seconds spent banking only made the bomber easier to hit once it leveled out, that a sharper analysis would have noticed the Beaufighter's real advantages. Its large frame could house the AI Mark V radar, a 90-kilogram device that required a dedicated operator. Smaller fighters couldn't carry such equipment, but the Beaufighter's roomy fuselage let the radar operator sit behind the pilot, tracking targets and guiding the attack in total darkness. The Germans knew about airborne radar. Their own Liechtenstein system was in development, but they failed to connect the Beaufighter's bulk with ability to carry advanced electronics. Its strong construction, inherited from the Beaufort's bomber wings, also gave it another edge. It could dive at high speed without breaking apart. Some Luftwaffe crews reported being attacked by Beaufighters that dove from above at frightening velocity, fired a quick burst, and vanished before anyone could shoot back. German intelligence dismissed these reports as exaggerations caused by stress, insisting the Beaufighter was too heavy for such tactics. WWII mid-1941. However, Luftwaffe lost reports told a different story. Bombers were vanishing over Britain, no radio calls, no distress signals, simply gone. When wrecks were found later, the damage clearly showed the work of large-caliber cannon fire. Yet official analysis stayed the same: heavy, slow, avoid if possible, but not a serious threat. The truth was written in the night skies of Britain through the winter of 1940 and into 1941. The Blitz was raging, with bomber streams crossing the channel in darkness, guided by radio beams towards cities from London to Liverpool. British night defenses were mostly ineffective. Searchlights swept empty air, anti-aircraft guns fired at sounds, and single-engine fighters wandered the dark hoping for a lucky encounter. The odds of interception were pitiful. Barely 2% of German bombers faced any opposition at all. Then the Beaufighter entered the equation, paired with the AI Mark IV radar. This radar worked by sending radio pulses and detecting echoes from metal aircraft. The radar operator, seated behind the pilot, watched a 20 centimeters cathode ray display where targets appeared as small glowing blips showing distance and bearing. Detection range varied with weather, but usually reached 4 to 8 kilometers against bombers. Interception now became systematic rather than random. Ground controllers used data from chain-home radar stations to vector Beaufighters toward enemy formations. Once in range, the onboard radar operator took over, giving precise directions while the pilot approached from below and behind, out of the bomber gunner sight. At about 300 meters, the pilot could finally see his prey, a faint dark silhouette against the night sky. He lined up the shot and fired a 2-second burst. The result was always the same. The bomber didn't spiral down or slowly burn. It exploded. Flight Lieutenant Ronald Ashford of No. 604 Squadron described one such encounter over Kent on January 19, 1941. His radar operator picked up a contact 6 kilometers away, guided him in, and soon Ashford saw a Heinkel He-111 silhouetted above. He closed to 70 meters behind and slightly below, aimed at the fuselage, and fired. The Heinkel's rear section tore away from the front. The bomber split into 3 pieces and fell before Ashford even released the trigger. The combination of radar guidance and the Beaufighter's concentrated firepower had turned night fighting from guesswork into precision killing, being fatal to lighter aircraft. Its concentrated firepower proved devastating to German bomber crews who never knew they were being hunted. Unlike daylight battles, where opponents could see each other from miles away. Night combat was sudden and intimate. The first sign that a Beaufighter was nearby was usually the impact of cannon shells. Defensive gunners never had a chance to fire back because they couldn't even see the attacker. Their only warning was a brief flash of gunfire, by which time their aircraft was already being torn apart. Between November 1940 and May 1941, both fighter squadrons claimed more than 100 confirmed bomber kills. The number might seem small, but in context, it was extraordinary. These kills were achieved in total darkness, each one an interception that older night fighters would have completely missed. German bomber losses over Britain began to rise steadily. Crews started reporting encounters with deadly twin-engine night fighters. The psychological effect was enormous. Imagine flying through the dark, knowing something unseen might be stalking you, and that your first warning will be explosions ripping your aircraft apart. Morale plummeted. Some Luftwaffe crews even asked for transfers to daylight missions, where at least they could see the enemy. The Beaufighter didn't need to shoot down every bomber. It only needed to make every bomber crew dread crossing the channel. Knowing that British night skies now had fangs up by February 1942, the Beaufighter had proven its worth as a night interceptor. But Coastal Command had discovered another deadly use for its firepower, attacking ships. 3 major German warships sat in Brest Harbor on the French coast, the battle cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. They had been there since March 1941, undergoing repairs and posing a constant threat to Atlantic convoys. British bombers had tried repeatedly to destroy them with little success and heavy losses. Hitler, frustrated that his prize ships were idle, ordered them home through the English Channel. The plan, codenamed Operation Cerberus, was astonishingly bold. It meant sailing massive warships through the narrowest part of the channel in daylight, right under Britain's coastal defenses. German naval officers called it suicidal, but Hitler insisted. Planning began in January 1942. The fleet slipped out of Brest just before midnight on February 11th. Thanks to luck, poor weather, and British radar failures, they went undetected until late morning on February 12th. By then, they were already off the French coast near Le Touquet, moving at nearly 30 knots with a huge escort of destroyers and E-boats. The Royal Navy and IAF scrambled everything they had, destroyers, torpedo boats, bombers, and fighters, in a desperate attempt to stop them. Both fighters from Coastal Command joined the assault that afternoon. These were not radar-equipped night fighters, but strike variants armed with torpedoes or rockets. Some still carried the standard 4 Hispano cannons, while others had a single torpedo slung beneath the fuselage. The torpedo-carrying versions, known as torpedo fighters, skimmed just above the waves, launching their Mach 2 torpedoes from under 1,000 meters away. The scene was pure chaos. German fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, swarmed the airspace, cutting down attackers. Anti-aircraft fire from the warships and their escorts filled the sky with bursts of flak. Visibility was poor, with clouds and snow squalls adding to the confusion. Still, the Beaufighters pressed on, diving through the defenses to reach firing range. Flight Lieutenant James Pitcairn Hill of No. 86 Squadron led a flight of cannon-armed Beaufighters without torpedoes. They attacked the destroyer screen, trying to silence the anti-aircraft guns and clear a path for the torpedo bombers. The Hill's after-action report described his aircraft hammering a German destroyer at point-blank range, his cannon shells walking up the deck in a line of explosions until the ship's guns went silent. Moments later, another vessel returned fire, hitting his Beaufighter hard. He managed to limp back across the channel, crash-landing at Manstown with one engine dead, and the fuselage shredded. The torpedo attacks themselves achieved little against the main warships. The Germans were ready, weaving and speeding to avoid hits. Most torpedoes missed. One may have struck Scharnhorst but failed to detonate. Torpedo reliability remained poor throughout the war still. The Beaufighters had proven something vital, that they could fight ships under the worst possible conditions. The Channel Dash, as the operation became known, succeeded. All 3 ships reached Germany, though both battle cruisers hit mines along the way and sustained damage. For Britain, it was a humiliating failure with heavy aircraft losses. But for Coastal Command, it was a turning point. They learned how to use a Beaufighter effectively in anti-shipping roles. Its cannons could silence escort ships. Its rugged frame could survive brutal battle damage that would have destroyed almost any other aircraft, beyond what most twin-engine fighters could manage. The lessons learned from the Channel Dash were applied with devastating success in the Mediterranean, where geography created the Beaufighter's perfect hunting ground. Axis forces in North Africa, Rommel's Afrika Korps and the Italian divisions, depended completely on supply lines across the Mediterranean, from Italian ports to Tripoli, Benghazi, and Tobruk. Every drop of fuel, every artillery shell, every replacement truck had to cross nearly 400 kilometers of open sea. The Royal Navy tried to cut these routes with submarines and surface ships, but by 1941 and early 1942 the central Mediterranean was practically an Axis lake, dominated by German and Italian aircraft from bases in Sicily and Libya. Beaufighters began arriving at Malta and North African airfields in late 1941, at first in small numbers. By mid-1942, entire strike wings were active, combining Beaufighters with Bristol Beaufort torpedo bombers for joint attacks. Their tactics evolved through brutal trial and error. Early raids saw Beaufighters attacking from medium altitude, only to be shredded by concentrated anti-aircraft fire from merchantmen and their destroyer escorts. Losses were severe. Some squadrons lost 30% of their aircraft in a single month. Then the crews discovered the Beaufighters' immense strength allowed tactics that would have torn lighter planes apart. They began flying at wave-top height, literally meters above the sea. This kept them below radar and made them almost impossible targets for anti-aircraft guns. At these low altitudes, the Beaufighter's size and weight turned from weakness to advantage. It stayed rock-steady in turbulent air just above the waves, while lighter aircraft bounced uncontrollably. A typical strike unfolded like a deadly machine. Beaufighters approached in single file, each aircraft spaced by a few seconds. The leader aimed at a freighter's waterline and opened fire from around 600 meters. The 420mm cannons punched holes through the hull plating. The shells couldn't sink ships outright, but they caused chaos, blowing apart bridges, killing gunners, starting fires, and disabling communication and control systems. By the time the second and third Beaufighters came in, the ship's defenses were crippled. The surviving gunners were dead, wounded, or hiding from the barrage. The Beauforts following behind could then launch their torpedoes with far less resistance. This coordinated tactic was brutally effective. Between June and November 1942, Beaufighter squadrons from Malta took part in attacks that sank or damaged more than 90 ships totaling about 300,000 tons. For perspective, German U-boats in the Atlantic during the same period sank roughly 450 ships, about 2.3 million tons, but they had hundreds of submarines operating over an entire ocean. The Mediterranean Beaufighters, rarely numbering more than 60 operational aircraft at once, achieved a tonnage-per-aircraft ratio even higher than the U-boats. The impact on the North African campaign was decisive. Rommel's advance into Egypt collapsed in late 1942 partly because his supply lines were destroyed. Fuel never arrived. Ammunition convoys went up in flames. Italian captains refused to sail without overwhelming air cover, something the Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica couldn't provide consistently. Captured German records later revealed that by October 1942, less than 30% of supplies leaving Italy reached North Africa. The rest lay on the seabed or burned at sea. Flight Lieutenant Arthur Gill of No. 272 Squadron kept a personal log. Between April and September 1942, he flew 43 shipping strikes. His terse notes told the story: attacked 3 merchants off Lampedusa, left 2 burning. Each line meant thousands of tons of cargo lost. Multiply that by every Beaufighter crew in the theater, and the scale of destruction becomes clear. While Beaufighters crippled Axis shipping in the Mediterranean, another front demanded the same kind of aircraft half a world away: the Pacific. The vast distances, humid heat, and rugged terrain made the region even harsher than North Africa. Missions could stretch over 1,600 kilometers round trip. The climate wrecked engines and electronics, and Japanese Zero fighters, light, agile, and deadly, could outturn any Allied plane. The Royal Australian Air Force received its first Beaufighters in late 1942 when No. 30 Squadron converted from Beauforts. These were not standard models, but tropicalized versions adapted for Pacific warfare. They had enlarged air filters to keep out dust from rough forward strips, upgraded oil coolers for better engine temperatures, and moisture-proof radio gear. Some versions carried extra fuel tanks, pushing their already long range even farther, ideal for the immense distances of the Pacific War. Within a circle no larger than a dinner plate, the discussion about agility became meaningless. The Mark 6 TF variant, built specifically for Pacific operations, began arriving with squadrons in early 1943. Like their Mediterranean counterparts, these aircraft carried torpedoes, but they also mounted rockets, 8 RP-3 projectiles under wings, each packing a 27 kilograms warhead. Combined with 4 20mm cannons, 6 machine guns, and a torpedo, the Mark 6 was one of the most heavily armed single aircraft of the war. Operations against Japanese shipping began in mid-1943, focusing first on convoys around New Guinea and the Bismarck Archipelago. Japanese supply routes fed garrisons at Rabaul, Wewak, and Leh, usually operating at night to avoid Allied aircraft. Beaufighters adapted by flying low-level dawn and dusk patrols, striking in half-light when Japanese fighters were least effective. One of their most devastating actions came during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea on March 2, 1943. A Japanese convoy of 8 transports carrying about 7,000 troops was caught in open water by Allied air power. IAF Beaufighters from No. 30 Squadron attacked in multiple waves over 2 days, raking decks with cannon fire to suppress anti-aircraft guns while American bombers struck from above. The result was total destruction. 8 transports and 4 destroyers sunk, with fewer than 1,000 Japanese survivors. Pilots described their cannon fire ripping through ship superstructures, igniting fires that consumed wooden decks and fuel stores within minutes. By late 1943, Beaufighter operations had expanded west into Burma, targeting shipping in the Bay of Bengal and along the Arakan coast. No. 27 Squadron flew long-range strikes from eastern India, hitting vessels supplying Japanese forces in Rangoon and coastal ports. The missions were grueling, some exceeding 900 kilometers each way, leaving barely enough fuel to return. The Japanese soon learned to fear the Beaufighter's power. Captured naval orders from mid-1944 instructed escorts to scatter if attacked by twin-engine fighters, since tight formations only drew deadlier fire. Damaged ships were told to beach themselves rather than stay afloat as helpless targets. Wing Commander Mick Kerr of No. 31 Squadron described one such assault in his August 1944 report. His flight attacked a Japanese freighter off Ambon. The first Beaufighter's rocket struck the waterline, blowing meter-wide holes in the hull. Kerr followed, sweeping the deck with cannon fire from bow to stern. When they withdrew, the ship was listing in a blaze. Coast watchers later confirmed it sank within 10 minutes. By late 1944, German intelligence analyses of the Beaufighter bore little resemblance to their dismissive early reports. The Luftwaffe now acknowledged what its A-crews had known for years, that the Bristol Beaufighter was one of the deadliest aircraft they faced. Not despite its size and weight, but because those traits didn't matter for its mission. A captured German briefing from January 1945, written by a Luftwaffe training officer, admitted that Beaufighter attacks were invariably fatal once firing began. Evasive turns were useless. The only hope was to avoid detection entirely through better timing and routing. It explicitly warned crews to abandon the belief that they could outturn or outrun a Beaufighter. Their best chance was to dive into cloud or terrain before it lined up its guns. This wasn't pessimism, it was experience-hardened realism. By war's end, Luftwaffe lost data left no doubt. Bombers engaged by Beaufighters almost never survived. Encounters with single-engine fighters might leave aircraft damaged but flyable. Beaufighter strikes ended in total destruction. Its concentrated 4-cannon salvo left nothing intact. The psychological impact was as profound as the physical one. German bomber crews crossing the North Sea grew anxious at the sight of any twin-engine silhouette. Every shadow demanded identification. In the Pacific, Japanese sailors dreaded the roar of Hercules' engines skimming the waves, the prelude to rockets and cannon fire that no defense could stop. British records later summarized the Beaufighter's record across all theaters. From September 1940 to August 1945, roughly 5,900 were built. They destroyed over 5,700 enemy aircraft, most of them bombers, and more than 600 ships totaling over 1 million tons. These figures exclude damaged targets, unconfirmed kills, or aircraft lost while evading attack. The cost was heavy, around 800 Beaufighters lost and 2,000 crew killed or captured, but the exchange ratio was unmatched. For every Beaufighter loss, nearly 7 enemy aircraft or several ships were destroyed. Few wartime aircraft equal that efficiency. Even German aces recognized it. Hermann Graf, who scored over 200 victories, told interviewers in 1948 that from a bomber crew's perspective, the Beaufighter was the most terrifying Allied aircraft. Its attacks were short, silent, and final, no second chances. The Germans had once marked it as heavy and slow, but those traits defined its strength. It was built for a singular purpose, to carry radar, heavy guns, and vast fuel loads, tools smaller fighters couldn't. It didn't need to outmaneuver anyone. It needed only to strike once, decisively. And at that task, the Beaufighter was unmatched, efficient, merciless, and utterly devastating.